going to talk a little bit about job search flexibility and crafting a skills-based resume. And the reason why one may want a skills-based resume is because there are many jobs that are not traditional legal practice, but do require the skills that you have developed and the knowledge that you have developed while in law school. So for these jobs, and today I'm going to focus specifically on regulatory compliance. For these jobs, you need a skills-based resume so that you can clearly set forth for an employer how your legal knowledge and skills and legal training fits with the position they're looking to fill. So let's start with the definition of regulatory compliance, right? So for anybody who doesn't know or hasn't had a class related to this, an organization's adherence to laws, regulations, guidelines, and specifications relevant to its business is what makes up compliance work. And if you think about any industry that is heavily regulated, whether it be healthcare or the financial industry or data privacy, and there are many others like energy, environmental, all of those industries require compliance with certain regulations. NALP, the National Association for Law Placement, recently shared a very helpful guide in which they identified some of the key search terms for jobs that fall under regulatory compliance. And you'll see here that some of them are very intuitive: compliance, compliance and ethics officer. Here, ethics is referring to professional responsibility. Also, compliance analyst. AML is specific to finance and refers to anti-money laundering. And those AML positions are often entry-level positions within the field of compliance. And then you'll see here also typical employers are banks, financial institutions, pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, healthcare companies, and higher education. So we thought it would be really helpful to reach out to some of our Albany Law alumni who are working within the compliance industry and find out from them what the transferable skills are that they use in their day-to-day and which they acquired during law school. And what we heard from many of our participants was that project management skills are incredibly important in order to build compliance programs and assess whether they're working. Change management and change strategy skills. In other words, when there's a big change within an organization, being able to manage those changes. Team management and people management. And we also heard investigative skills are incredibly important, especially when dealing with issues around financial fraud. We also heard that the ability to demonstrate a diverse set of interests was helpful for these alumni when they were applying for jobs. In terms of applications, many indicated they used LinkedIn. They also thought about, and some acquired, additional certifications. For example, for privacy, there is the International Association of Privacy Professionals, which issues a certificate. And then there are many different financial certificates as well. Our alumni also thought it was really important for applicants to demonstrate an entrepreneurial mindset of flexibility, being innovative, being a self-starter. And they noted that their employers were looking for examples of collaboration. Again, having to do with teamwork and team building. NALP also identified professional competencies that are sought by employers for these jobs that I call beyond legal practice. And in terms of these competencies, they identified persuasive presentation, the ability to understand legal documents, regulations, the ability to evaluate and organize data, to stay current with legislation and guidelines, the ability to analyze complicated information, assess risk, provide advice about rules and regulations, and propose solutions. And then, of course, strong research and writing skills. So now when we think about crafting our skills-based resume, we want to think about how the competencies that we've gained by studying law fit with the competencies that employers are looking for, right? And we know that in law school, there is a lot of emphasis placed on analyzing, reasoning, evaluating, problem solving, and decision-making, all of the critical thinking skills that were identified as competencies sought by employers. Now also took the next step to identify the transferable legal skills that could be applied to jobs within compliance. And some of them are identified here: the ability to spot issues, right? Identify problems, analyze arguments, evaluate effective and realistic approaches, develop creative approaches to problems, advise clients, research the law, communicate, draft clearly, be an active listener, persuasion, negotiation, planning, and managing conflict. All of these skills are skills that one acquires during a law school education. NALP also identified transferable characteristics. In other words, what are the characteristics that these employers are looking for that one might want to highlight? Some of them are here. They are intellectual curiosity, being proactive, engaged, resourceful, self-sufficient. So all of these characteristics are good to include in a cover letter, certainly, and in a skills-based resume. All right, so how do we approach creating the skills-based resume so that employers will look at it and consider your qualifications for one of these beyond legal practice jobs? So the first thing is to realize that your resume has to tell a story. It has to be very clear to an employer why it is that you are applying for this position. If you can't convey clearly to an employer what it is about your experience and characteristics that make you a good candidate, you cannot expect them to figure it out. So in terms of the style of your resume, do try to keep it to one page. And also make sure that you refer to the job description, because if you don't have keywords in your resume, you won't get past the applicant tracking system, which unfortunately most employers use today. And what it does is it scans for keywords and only picks up the resumes with a certain amount of those keywords. The other thing to remember is that a skills-based resume is very different from a legal resume because it will contain an executive summary. It will highlight key skills right at the top of the resume. And it will also highlight the skills that are relevant to the position, but may not necessarily be in reverse chronological order. So in other words, it's going to clearly identify for the employer what you bring to the table. All right, so in order to create a skills-based resume from a traditional legal resume, I thought it would be a good idea to look at a posting for one of these positions that's a beyond legal practice position. This one happens to be a compliance associate analyst position with Citi. It was posted very recently, and I believe I found it on LinkedIn. And just to look at some of the key responsibilities, the position is looking for someone to work in anti-money laundering, that's AML, and know your client, which is another requirement for financial institutions to know who they're dealing with. The responsibilities include due diligence to make sure that customer accounts and are compliant with the regulations and documented. Complying with local regulations and city standards, updating and reviewing forms according to local regulation requirements, following up with clients, so communication skills and client counseling skills, monitoring and tracking records, so anyone who has worked in litigation has tremendous experience doing that, and assessing risk, which is really what you're trained to do in law school all throughout. All right, so what I want to do now is stop sharing this screen and share with you a screen. Just find my sample resume that I have created for this position out of a legal resume. Okay, so you're going to notice that I've included an executive summary here, which a legal resume does not have. You're going to also notice that I started with summary, key skills, and experience as opposed to education. The reason why I did that is because I want this employer to understand that while I have a JD, I'm not looking to utilize my JD in the traditional sense. Right? I want the employer to first take note of the summary and skills that I bring to the table. So I have highlighted here in red some of the key characteristics and skills that I think are important for the position based on the description. I would not recommend using any color on your real resume. This is just for teaching purposes. But you'll notice that what I include here are analytical, problem-solving skills. Again, these are key words that the applicant tracking system is going to pick up. Exemplary communication skills, the ability to interpret complex regulations and communicate them clearly and concisely to a range of audiences. This is really important for anybody working in, well, for anybody, frankly, but especially in compliance, where you need to convince your business partners that there are certain protocols that have to be put into place and followed. Here I was able to take a little bit of liberty in sort of including some experience specific to this job around investment, knowledge of the Investment Company Advisory Act. But I think that when you are looking at these job positions, think about the research you've done in various classes and clinics. You can experience, you can gain knowledge by researching and being exposed to issues, and it's perfectly fine to include that in your resume. In terms of key skills, I first looked at the experience, right? Thinking about the story that I was telling here. And from that experience, I grabbed some key skills that I thought were really important to this position. So due diligence, certainly anyone who is working on any kind, as a law clerk, you could be working on a contract, real estate, you have to do due diligence. Any kind of business planning, you have to do your due diligence. I would even argue that in researching for and preparing for litigation, you're doing your due diligence, and that's why I used here /investigation, right? You're looking at the case, you're thinking about the strategy for the case, and so that is how I determined that due diligence would be a skill I would highlight based on this person's experience. Project management comes from managing cases, right? Figuring out where you are in the case, what needs to be done, who is going to be doing it, who's going to work on different sections. You could even gain project management skills from working on law review or one of the other journals, or certainly in a clinic where you're working on a project as a team and managing that project. Regulatory interpretation, again, I was able to take that from some, you'll see down here, some research experience that this person did. Client counseling, we have a lot of experience that students get around client counseling through the clinics. And so that was something that you can include. If you don't have client counseling experience, you might frame that as communication experience. Record management, again, there's so many aspects of lawyering that require excellent record management. And then presentation skills, which is something that we work on constantly in law school, whether it be presenting before a client or moot court or in class. In terms of the experience, you're going to notice something very different from what we typically advise for a resume, which is in this resume, I use bullets. In a legal resume, I tend to not use bullets because I think that the paragraph style allows you to be more descriptive about the work that you're doing as it relates to the law. Here, however, because these employers are not really familiar with the legal resume, the traditional legal resume, I think that it's really useful to use the bulleted resume and really highlight the aspects of your experience that are relevant to the position. So here, and I won't repeat everything that I've previously talked about, but the one distinction underneath the first entry is that you'll note that I included how many cases this person worked on about. And the reason for that is because it shows that project management skill and the ability to manage multiple responsibilities at the same time. And that's something that you could talk about in a cover letter for any one of these positions. And the research assistant position, I highlighted the research on corporate governance issues, obviously for this position specifically, and the federal financial regulations. I think you could actually mention them again there if you wanted to, but since I mentioned them in the summary, I thought that was sufficient. And then you'll notice that unlike your legal resume, your education here is at the bottom. You can also include on a skills-based resume interests. I encourage you to include any kind of volunteer work that demonstrates that you have a competencies in language or cultural competencies. I think that's great to include. And then of course, if you've taken a CLE or you've taken any kind of certificate program that is applicable to the position, that should be added at the bottom as well. So that is what a skills-based resume looks like. It's different from a legal resume. It takes a good deal of work to really consider the job description and how you want to work in the key terms into your resume. But what we have learned from our alumni and from the industry in general, according to NELP, is that many law students go into these types of positions for various reasons. Many just don't want to be in an adversarial role when they come out of law school. And so these positions are a really nice way to use your knowledge and skills, but not be in that adversarial role. So with that, I invite you to unmute yourselves if you have questions, and I will take a look in the chat.
Hey, Fitzpatrick. Chris asked if we could provide a sample of a skills-based resume so they could use it as a template.
Absolutely, and I am happy to provide this one. And we can talk about some others, Chris, as you start thinking about how you want to fit your experience into a skills-based resume. Any other questions? Okay, so what I would like to do is offer anyone who is on this call, I would offer to send you the PowerPoint with the sample resume in addition to the study and resource that I referenced that was sent by NELP this spring regarding jobs that are beyond legal practice. They call them JD Advantage jobs, which in addition to the financial compliance jobs has a great resource for looking for these types of jobs within healthcare, within data privacy, and several other areas that may be of interest to you and for which you are qualified.
Excellent, thank you. Do you want us to email you if we'd like a copy of that, or?
That'd be terrific, Chris. That would be fantastic.
I have another question if you're, if no one else does.
Yep.
I know that people say fairly often that it's good to keep a resume to one page. But I'm over 50 and I feel like that brings a significant disadvantage to being on the job market. And if I use 2 pages, it allows me to say, you know what, I've done a lot with those 25 years. And so it's worth, you know, it's worth considering me, even if I'm not 25. What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, so I really believe that if you have significant experience that's relevant, you should include it and don't worry about running afoul the 1-page rule. I would say go ahead and use 2 pages. Be critical about what you're including. You don't want anyone to look at it and say, "What, you know, why is this in here? I'm not sure why it's relevant." But I do think that if you have solid experience, go ahead and include it.
Okay.
And don't worry about 2 pages.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Hi, this is Christy Cooper. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, so thank you. This was really helpful.
Welcome.
I have a question about how I should use these different resumes. So if I have a legal resume that has more of the paragraph style experience written out, and then I create something like this, are there times when I should continue to use the legal resume for positions maybe in compliance or things like that, or when I shouldn't use it, you know, when this is more advantageous? I also am in a similar spot where I have 10 years of work experience that I'm working on fitting in, but sometimes those experiences apply or are more relevant to a particular position and less to another. And I'm worried about coming up with like 6 different versions and keeping them straight. So I just wonder what your advice would be for that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say to you that you will always want to use a legal resume for a traditional legal position. So an attorney position, an associate position, in-house legal counsel position, government lawyer position, public interest position, all of those that are really traditional legal practice positions, you want to use your legal resume. I hear you in terms of coming up with 6 different resumes. I think that you could probably make a skills-based resume general enough to fit many of these positions because they're so heavily reliant upon the transferable skills. So to the extent that you can look at your experiences and say, okay, you know, the transferable skill set here is communication, is analysis, is presentation, then I think that you could probably get a resume to the point where whether you're using it to apply for a position in the world of healthcare or the world of financial compliance, either way, you're hitting the right terms. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And
I think there's probably there could be a little differentiation, and maybe you have one or two of those depending on your experience and how it fits.
mhm. Yeah, for sure. Thank you. That's helpful. And there was just one other follow-up I wanted to ask, and it just left me. So I'll I'll ask if it comes back to me.
Okay, thanks, Christy. Sorry, we'll come back to you. Or you can
No.
always email me too. Don't worry about that.
Great, thank you.
You got it. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, again, if anyone's interested in the handouts, just shoot me a quick email. I'm happy to share everything with you. And I'm also happy to look at your skills-based resumes as you start drafting them and give you some feedback along the way. I think these are incredible opportunities. I will say I wish I had taken advantage of them as a young lawyer, but I want to make sure that everybody is aware of them. Right. All right, guys, have a great afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.